What's up, fellow emo, pop, punk, metalcore music lovers? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alternative music fix. And today is all about the March Sadness bracket. I am super stoked to be here to talk about the first region in our bracket. If you haven't seen the bracket yet, head on over to my Instagram. I have the link in my bio so you can go fill out your own bracket, show me your predictions, let me know what you think and who you think has the best album of the 57 albums that will be played at this year's When We Were Young Fest. So before we jump into the first region and go through the entire thing, let's talk about some rules, criteria, how I'm making some of these decisions, and basically what to expect throughout this process. So first things first, the criteria that I laid out in the last podcast was that the first 7 albums that you see on here, seeds 1 through 7, were ones that I felt like are basically scene staples that needed a first round bye, that they really didn't need to go into that random number generator and get a random seed. Seeds 8 through 57 all were put into a random number generator, and I went album by album and I spun a wheel and I got a number, and that number corresponded to them. And we went through the entire bracket just like that. With that being said, some of those numbers may look a little strange. Don't get too upset. That's just the number that they got randomly assigned. That doesn't mean that the favorite's always going to be the favorite or there's not going to be some big upsets. Just pay attention to that and we should be good. The next thing is, how do I determine who is going to move on to the next round and who ultimately wins this bracket? Who is the March Sadness champion? Well, it's very difficult to say. A lot of people say it's just going to be the favorite and your favorite album, which is part of it, but I'm looking at a few things. The first thing that I'm using here is nostalgia. How many times have we heard that all we want is albums that sound like some of the ones that we're going to touch on in this specific tournament? How many times have we heard, oh, I wish we had more albums that sounded like A Lesson in Romantics, or more Black Parade, or more Page Avenue? We hear it a lot. So what type of nostalgia have these albums brought us? And when we look back at listening to these, which I should add, I also went back and listened to every single one of these albums over again, which was a fantastic time and so much fun to be able to revisit some of these that maybe I haven't listened to in a while. How do they make us feel? Does that nostalgia still hit home? Does it start to remind us of things from the past? That's one of the first things that I'm looking for in terms of who's going to move on. The second thing is the lasting impact that these albums have made. It's very clear that some of these albums have become scene staples and made the scene exactly what it is today and made it so great back in those days. Mid to late 2000s, early to late 2010s, those are the time frame that most of these albums were released in, and what better way to determine who moves on than to who had a more lasting impact? So that's another thing that we're going to be looking at. And as always, as I do with all my other reviews, how's the sound, how's the lyrics, and overall just what was my experience with the album. So now that you have an understanding of how I'm going to run this tournament, how I'm going to pick the winners, so to speak, we're going to start today with the VANS region. So the VANS region is a pretty large region, and the first overall seed in this tournament and the only bye in this region is Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. So they are already moving on to round 2. So let's jump into our first round matchups. The first matchup that we got is Never Take Friendship Personal by Anne Berlin versus The Greatest Generation by The Wonder Years. This one was a little bit easier than I expected it to be for me. I think when we look at both of these albums, both of them are really strong, but I think it was very clear upon re-listen that this was an Anne Berlin victory. This was something that, when I looked at that Wonder Years album, it's a good album, it's a strong album, but I think this is where these types of matchups are going to be very interesting to see throughout this entire tournament, because the Wonder Years Greatest Generation album was released in 2013. The Anne Berlin album was released, I think, in 2004. So Anne Berlin has an album that comes out really kind of at this point in time where we're not completely exploded into superstardom and pop punk always around, but we're also not underground at this point. Like, pop punk's starting to get a little bit more popular and a little bit more notoriety, and the scene's starting to really take off and really start to grow. So this Anberlin album hits at a perfect time. And I also think when you look at this Anberlin album, I think you have some instant classics on here like Feel Good Drag, and it's just, overall, it's got a better sound, better style. And like I said, when I'm doing this tournament, I'm not saying that any of these albums are bad, because I still enjoy that Wonder Years album. There's still really strong stuff on it. So don't think of it as, oh, he's saying that the Wonder Years is a really bad album. No, that's not the case at all. All I'm saying is that in this particular scenario, when we put them together, I personally think that Anberlin has a better album than the Wonder Years, which is why they are moving on to round 3. Sorry, round 2. Got ahead of myself there. The next matchup in round 1 is Saosin versus Gravity by Against the Current. So this one was very simple for me. This was a Saosin win very quickly, but I do want to take a second and point out that Against the Current for this specific exercise just had the wrong album that went up against Saosin here. Obviously, when you look at that self-titled album from Saosin, you have You're Not Alone, which is a absolute scene staple. It is a classic that every single person that grew up in this scene or around this scene knows the song, and as soon as it comes on, everybody knows every word. Against the Current is a band that really just kind of came at the end of the height of popularity of this alt-rock scene, and has really been one of the bands to try and keep it rolling and keep it moving, and kind of trying to be that next generation that helps continue to push the scene forward, and I can appreciate that. The problem is, I don't think Gravity was the EP or the album to do it. I think when we look at Against the Current, I think if they would have chose Past Lives, that album really is one of my top favorites, and I would have had a lot more trouble determining who would have been the victor here, but it wasn't. Past Lives, while it's a great album, isn't the one that Against the Current's playing this year when we were young. So unfortunately, we can't talk too much about that. We're just going to talk about the ones we have. Saosin moving on to round 2 very easily, in my opinion. And just one final piece about this Saosin Against the Current matchup is that it's kind of the same as the one before. The Saosin album came out in 2006. Against the Current was 2013 maybe, and again, it's just the difference in times that very clearly stood out on this matchup, and that's why Saosin moved on. Our third matchup is Weird Kids by We Are the In Crowd versus The Other Side by Tonight Alive. One of the more difficult matchups for me to really determine a victor right away. This was one that I went back and forth on a lot because this was a very even matchup. But at the end of the day, I am just barely taking Weird Kids by We Are the In Crowd to move on to round 2. I think the thing that stood out for me is that when you go to like Spotify pages and stuff like that, and you see what everybody's like top 5 tracks are, when you're doing an exercise like this, you expect to see 2 to 3 tracks from the album probably on that page. And that's exactly what happened here with both of these bands. We Are the In Crowd and Tonight Alive, 2 to 3 tracks from the Weird Kids or the Other Side album were on their top 5. And I think for me, the supporting tracks on Weird Kids just stood out and were a little bit better than the supporting tracks on the Other Side. One of the tracks that really has always kind of had my attention is Dreaming Out Loud. So I think those are the types of sounds and those are the types of songs that really propelled Weird Kids by We Are the In Crowd into their round 2. The next matchup is This War Is Ours by Escape the Fate versus In the Shadow of Two Gunmen by The Forecast. And I say this with the utmost respect, the utmost love to The Forecast. This was just a battle they were never going to win. Unfortunately, they were just never going to win this battle. This War Is Ours by Escape the Fate is one of those albums that really probably could have been considered for a first round bye. It has been that impactful in the scene, and it very clearly moved on in this scenario. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it here because obviously it is moving on to the next round and we'll talk about it a little bit more there. But still, all love to the Forecast. I think their album was so fun. They just unfortunately got dealt a really bad hand in who they got in their first round matchup. So This War Is Ours by Escape the Fate, moving on to round 2. The next first round matchup is Plagues by The Devil Wears Prada versus Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World. This was another really tough matchup because I think you have two very significantly different styles. You have The Devil Wears Prada, who's definitely more of a metalcore outfit, versus Jimmy Eat World, which is very much a pop rock, pop punk sound. But at the end of the day, when I looked at my criteria and when I looked at the overall nature of these albums, Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World won and is moving on to round 2. I think the thing that stands out with this Bleed American album is absolutely the nostalgia and the lasting impact that it had, because there is not a place that you go, there was not a teen movie that you listened to that one of their songs from this album was not on there. So I think when you see that, it's very easy to forget that this album had such an impact in the way that it did. But that's why in this scenario, Bleed American moving on to round 2. The sixth first round matchup is Best Buds by Mom Jeans versus Bayside Self-Titled. This one for me was pretty easy. Bayside's moving on to round 2, and I think it's just one of those things that I've never really gotten into Mom Jeans as an artist and as a band. I don't have much to say about them. I just never really have been able to wrap my head around their style, their sound, anything like that. And Bayside's album was just better in my opinion anyway, but that's just one of those bands that for some reason I just can't get it, and I don't know why. And I want to see what you guys think about this matchup, because maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm missing something. But in this particular scenario, Bayside moving on to round 2. And our last first round matchup is Mothership by Dance Gavin Dance versus Commit This to Memory by Motion City Soundtrack. Look, guys, this is another one that's really, really tough for me because both of these albums are so much fun. But when I look at it, this is one where I'm taking personal feelings into account. And when I'm taking my personal feelings into account on this one, I'm giving it to Commit This to Memory by Motion City Soundtrack. I have such a personal connection to that album, and specifically everybody's song that they know and they love from this band is Everything Is All Right. That song means a lot to me. That song has a lot of memories behind it in terms of my gaming habits when I was younger. It was in video games that I loved. It was in movies that I loved, and it was just always around, and it was one of those songs that I really attribute to my love for this scene. So it's hard not to say that this is an album that deserves to go far for me. That being said, the Dance Gavin Dance Mothership album is another one that really everybody loves and everybody appreciates. And so I don't think there would have been a wrong choice here. I think if you guys are filling out your own brackets, I'll be interested to see kind of what the breakdown is in terms of who has Mothership and who has Commit This to Memory. But for our purposes today, Commit This to Memory, moving on to round 2. All right, that wraps it up for round 1, guys. So moving on, we had Anne Berlin, Saosin, Escape the Fate, Jimmy Eat World, Bayside, and Motion City Soundtrack, all moving into the second round where My Chemical Romance already had a bye. And that means we are into our second round matchups, with the first one being Black Parade by My Chemical Romance versus Never Take Friendship Personal by Anne Berlin. Guys, I don't think there's much of an explanation needed here. Anne Berlin, you got drawn a short straw again. I'm sorry to say it, but you got drawn the short straw here. When you go up against Black Parade had a bye for a reason. I think there's not many albums that come close to that, but I will be interested to see where my head is at as I continue to go through this. But for our round 2 matchup, Black Parade by My Chemical Romance is moving on to the third round. Our next second round matchup, Weird Kids by We Are the In Crowd versus the self-titled Saosin. We Are the In Crowd had moved on, and in this matchup between Saosin and We Are the In Crowd, I think, again, this is where the lasting impact and the nostalgia comes into play, because I am going to have Saosin move on to round 3. I think, again, they have the benefit of having a little bit older album in this case, and they also have a song that had such a lasting impact on this scene in You're Not Alone. I think it's hard for We Are the In Crowd to beat something like that, and that is why Saosin is moving on to round 3. Our third matchup in the second round, and the juggernaut of all juggernaut matchups in this region, is Escape the Fate, This World Is Ours versus Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World. Guys, I don't even know where to start with this one. This one is one of those matchups where, again, is there a wrong choice? Probably not, but it feels like there is a wrong choice with this, right? Like, I feel like no matter who I pick, I'm going to have the wrong choice, and if I picked the opposite, I would feel the same way. So, going back to this matchup and looking at these albums and re-listening to these albums, I think at the end of the day, when I look at all of my criteria, lasting impact, nostalgia, sound, lyrics, all of the above, Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World wins out in those categories against Escape the Fate. Really, really hard for me to pick a winner there. Really hard to find a winner there. This is one that, if we use basketball terms, it's probably going overtime, maybe double overtime, because it's just that hard to pick against these two albums. They're both spectacular. They're both some of my absolute favorites from this scene and absolute favorites from that time. But Bleed American just has too many tracks on there that would be instant classics, that are instant classics, that even non-alt scene people would know and non-scene kids would actually know and appreciate and love. So Jimmy Eat World, Bleed American, moving on to round 3. And our final round 2 matchup is Bayside versus Commit This to Memory by my Motion City Soundtrack. This one was easier for me than the first round matchup for these two, because I think when you get two albums like this, they're very similar, but at the end of the day, Motion City Soundtrack has a better album here and has a stronger lasting impact. So while I appreciate Bayside and I appreciate that self-titled album, I think Motion City Soundtrack just is a far superior album in this case to them. So Motion City Soundtrack, Commit This to Memory, moving on to round 3. That ends round 2. So our round 2 participants were actually My Chemical Romance, Amber Lynn, Saosin, We Are the In Crowd, Escape the Fate, Jimmy Eat World, Bayside, and Motion City Soundtrack. From those, we have moved into the final 4 of the VANS region, which will be My Chemical Romance versus Saosin, and the second matchup will be Jimmy Eat World versus Motion City Soundtrack. So looking at the first matchup here in our VANS region final 4, My Chemical Romance versus Saosin, this is a little bit tougher. I mean, this is one that actually has to have some thought behind it. It can't just be automatically pencil in Black Parade or something like that. But again, I think Black Parade has at least 2 tracks on there that are scene staples, that are cult classics, that are however you want to describe them. With Welcome to the Black Parade and Teenagers, I think you have 2 tracks that just will completely transcend time. Whereas with Saosin, I think You're Not Alone is really the only one that I can say is a cult classic, scene staple. And even so, I still think that that's a track that not necessarily non-scene kids would know. So I think when we look at this, Saosin had a great run. Hard to see them bow out, but they're going to bow out here, and My Chemical Romance is going to move on to the Elite 8 in the tournament and the final in the VANS region to face either Jimmy Eat World or Motion City Soundtrack in that matchup. So looking at that second matchup, the Jimmy Eat World Motion City Soundtrack, this one is a little more clear cut, I think, at this point, right? Like, I think once we've gotten to this point, it's very clear to me that Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World deserves a spot in the VANS region final. I think, like I said, I have a very personal connection to Commit This to Memory, and while I can appreciate that album, it would be very, very difficult to eliminate an album like Bleed American for something like Commit This to Memory. Because I think while Everything Is Alright is a scene staple, so is The Middle, Sweetness, and even the title track Bleed American. All are scene staples, all are classics, all are songs that everyone knows on this earth. So with that, it sets up our VANS region final. Black Parade by My Chemical Romance versus Bleed American by Jimmy Eat World. So the final in the VANS region and the first Final Four participant in the March Sadness tournament, that's going to go to Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. I think this was a matchup that probably a lot of people would have predicted in the final before the Final Four entry, but I'm not sure how people are going to go with this. And just because this is the way that I went, when you guys fill out your own brackets, trust me, you do not have to go the same way that I do. I want to see how many of you have similar thoughts to me, so I'm interested in seeing those. But for our case today, Black Parade is that album that everybody wants. Black Parade is that album that we've been clamoring for. And we've been asking My Chemical Romance to come back for years now, right? And we got a track from them 3 years ago at this point, and it was Foundations of Decay, and they went on this whole tour. They went and did all these things, and we still haven't gotten an album yet. And so when My Chemical Romance announces that they're performing Black Parade in full at When We Were Young Fest, people exploded with enthusiasm, with excitement. This is something that we've been hoping for. This is kind of the new thing in touring, is to get yourself an album and perform it in full, especially in this scene. I feel like this scene is one that has it more than anybody else, where bands are coming back and saying, I'm going to perform this album in full, like Yellowcard did last year with Ocean Avenue, like Story of the Year is doing this year with Page Avenue, like some of these other bands. Green Day's doing it with 2 albums on their tours. So like, this is something that's becoming more of a norm. But I think when you look at it, when you have 2 albums like this that are very much in the same stratosphere, right? Like we have Bleed American and we have the Black Parade. If you ask somebody, you can only pick one tour to go to. You can either go see My Chemical Romance perform Black Parade in full, or you can see Jimmy Eat World perform Bleed American in full. Which one are you picking? I'm going to guarantee that 9 out of 10 people are going to pick My Chemical Romance Black Parade. While everybody can appreciate what Bleed American is as an album and the fantastic nature of the songs on it, I think My Chemical Romance has this aura about them that they were the giant of the scene. Everybody knows Fall Out Boy. Everybody knows Blink. Everybody knows all of those bands, the Paramours, the Panic at the Discos. Those are the bands that we've been looking for. And I think when we have a My Chemical Romance return and say that they're going to perform their debated best album, I'm saying debated because I think we all can agree that they've had 2 really, really superior albums in that time frame. I think most people would say, give me that all day over just about anybody else performing an album. So with that, My Chemical Romance wins the VANS region, moves on to the Final Four, where they will play the winner of the Red Bull region, and we'll see who that is on our next podcast episode. So what did you guys think? Did you like this? Was this fun? Was this too short of an episode? Was this too long of an episode? Do you want me to break it down a little bit further? I think when we look at these episodes, they might be on the shorter side because I'm not going to sit here and review Black Parade or sit here and review Bleed American or This War Is Ours. Guys, these are albums that I know that you've listened to probably hundreds of times. But what I am going to do is I'm going to bring some things to the table and say, like, okay, you know what? This is why this album's more superior. This is why this is this way. And this has been a blast to do. I gotta be honest. This has been so much fun to revisit these albums and revisit these times. You know, I think we all have this hunger for nostalgia and this hunger for that time in our life to come back sometimes. And so if you're feeling like that, if you want a little slice of nostalgia, do yourself a favor, fill out a bracket, go listen to the albums again if you haven't listened to them in a while, and then tell me what you think. Tell me what your March Sadness winner is going to be. And do me a big favor, share this with all your friends and family, have them participate in this as well. Let's blow this up a little bit. This has been a lot of fun to do, and I want to keep doing more of these brackets. I want to do these potentially every month. Let's do a new tournament each month. Like, I'm thinking about some possibilities for next month. Maybe we'll do an artist best track tournament, and we'll be a lot less entries, obviously, but maybe we'll look at whoever wins this tournament, whether it's, you know, My Chemical Romance, who is already in the Final Four, whoever else may be there. Maybe we take their 10 best songs and we put them against each other and we determine what is the best My Chemical Romance song or best whoever song. Those are some ideas that I got floating around in my head, but in the meantime, thank you guys for tuning in. As always, Matrix Music Review on all social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Instagram is where I'm the most active. And guys, when you are looking for next week's episode, a couple of days before this episode goes live on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you're listening, I run a poll on the Instagram page and put these first round matchups on there so you guys can vote on who you think has the better album and who should move on. It's a lot of fun. Some of the artists have even been getting involved, so that's been a lot of fun. And as I always do, I ask that you share the podcast with friends and family. Let's continue to grow our little community of alt-rock music lovers. And you'll be getting a brand new review of new music. That episode is coming early next week, so stay tuned. Until then, fill out your bracket, and I will see you next time.